Welcome to Raids and Barrels. It's Wednesday, February 4th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. It's our starting pitcher preview part 2 because we are in the middle of pitcher week. This episode is going to focus on pitchers that go between pick 100 and 200 in early NFBC drafts. We got through the first 26 pitchers coming off the board in part 1 of this series. We think there are supposed to be 3 episodes like this, and quite honestly, there may be a 4th coming out next week based on the course we're on right now. I'm also starting to come down with a minor cold, so if I lose my voice, I will just hold up a card with a pitcher name on it, and Eno will wax poetic and analyze that pitcher accordingly. So we're going to go for as long as my voice works.
'Tis the season.
Yeah, 'tis the season, right? Dead of winter. It was coming all along. So we're going to pick things up right where we left off at that pick 100 marker. We're calling it ADP Tier 3A. These guys go within 25 picks of each other. This group includes Spencer Strider, Chase Burns, Tyler Glasnow, Brandon Woodruff, Sonny Gray, Kevin Gausman, and Emmet Sheehan. Starting at the very top, I think we may still have some disagreement about Spencer Strider. That started bubbling up during our live show at First Pitch Arizona back in November. I think projections for Strider are basically useless, not because I don't like projections, but I think when someone pitches and is coming back from a pretty significant injury, which Strider was, coming off of internal brace surgery last season, it just doesn't get a good snapshot of what that player is going to do going forward with better health, potentially. At least it can't really account for that. It can only tell you what happened based on diminished stuff and velocity, which was the case for Strider. But I think when you look back at the overall body of work and you consider that he was going from rehab to return, he had this stretch where he was pitching just nonstop for over a year, basically. And he hit this wall in the second half. And I think when I look at Strider, I see a guy that is going to make the adjustments if the velocity doesn't come back in a regular offseason. There will be other adjustments to the arsenal. Mechanically, physically, there's going to be things he does differently where he's not going to be the same guy that relies so heavily on his fastball and his slider to be among the league's best strikeout pitchers, right? So it might look a little bit different, but the more I think about Strider and read about their situation with Jeremy Hefner being the pitching coach there and the way Strider's talked about how his body felt last year, I just have this amazing level of optimism that he's going to get back to a much higher level than we saw in 2025, even if he's not going to go all the way back to peak Strider again.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the velo that he lost. He also lost 2 inches of ride off his four seam from before. He lost an inch of drop on the slider, despite the slider going slower. Usually you get more drop when it's slower. There were some changes to the changeup and the curve that, those could be viable pitches long term. And there will just be pressure on him to throw those if he's just not as dominant with the main 2. Does he have enough finesse to add those? I get some real Dylan Cease vibes with Spencer Strider, where I feel like he's been trying to push these pitches for a while and hasn't really successfully found a non-fastball slider pitch. But I will say that there is a little bit of a difference between the two in terms of I don't know. You said he's analytically minded. You know what I mean? Like Dylan Cease often talks to me about, sometimes I got to put the numbers away and just find the right feel, whereas Strider is trying to match feel with what the numbers are saying. And maybe that makes me more optimistic about him. Looking at the model refresh, looking at the new projections, I probably had him a little bit low. 380 projection is not as bad as I thought. And I could slide him maybe into the top 40. Right now, I have him around 43, 44. It's probably not going to get him drafted if you're using my rankings, but I think there's something here.
I'm going back to last season. I had Strider on a few teams. One in a league where I had unlimited IL spots, so I just loaded up on guys that were either coming off of injuries or were going to miss part of the year with an injury. Strider had a 3.59 ERA and a 1.15 WHIP after his start July 18th against the Yankees. And I think that's about when he started to hit that wall. And I think if you get to the stretch in early August, the Brewers put 5 on him, the Mets put 8 on him, the White Sox put 7 on him. That was in 3 consecutive starts. That's sort of where that wall he's talked about seemed to seem to hit. So I think he did have some opportunities to show us he was making adjustments in September. Things looked a little better at the end of the season, so I'm in at price on Strider. I also say that knowing that this is absolutely the type of pitcher that if things are going well in spring, it will cost you more in March than it costs you in February, right? ADP will go up for a player like this. So really intrigued by Spencer Strider at the current price and will remain intrigued if he looks good this spring. If you're looking for another great pitcher that has crazy strikeout upside, I think Chase Burns actually reminds me a little bit of a young Strider. It was 109 in the third innings last season across 4 levels for the Reds. Took a really quick trip to the IL at the end of the year, which looked more like load management than a really troubling sort of arm injury. And in the last 10 seasons, only Spencer Strider has a higher K percentage among rookies working in starting pitcher roles, right? So Burns was missing a ton of bats. It's a 2-pitch mix, very similar to what we saw from Strider upon arrival. Top-end velocity. We had that one really bad meltdown against the Red Sox that probably sticks out in people's minds where it was pretty clear that Burns had a tipping issue in that outing. So that bloated his ratios in a pretty limited sample with the Reds. I think he's
was that confirmed
toss-up.
like a physical tipping issue? I mean, I just thought
it was a glove angle thing is what I was seeing.
Okay. Interesting, because when I was watching it, I just thought, what if his pitch arsenal is so small that they were just jumping on fastballs?
Just locking on something.
Yeah.
Either way, it was believed to be part of the story. I think it's an interesting toss-up with Nolan McLean, who we sort of closed out part 1 of this series with, because they have very different approaches, and you could look at Burns and say, hey, 2 electric pitches at the top of the arsenal might be enough to just rack up a ton of Ks, and that projection is just ridiculous from Oopsie for Chase Burns too, so it's hard to ignore when you can get him right around that pick 100 mark.
I mean, there are 4 pitchers in my top 150 with a sub-3 ERA projection, and you're looking at them right now, and the other 3 go 1, 2, 3 in my rankings. So it's pretty exciting to have a sub-3 ERA projection and be on the same list as Tarek Skubal, Paul Skeens, and Garrett Crochet. Of course, I have those guys projected for 190 innings about on average, and I have Chase Burns for 139, and I don't even know, 139 is aggressive. It reflects the fact that, to me, last year he had 109 innings, and I think they're going to need him this year. I do wonder if they're going to play games with him like they did last year in terms of putting him in the bullpen and stuff like that. But I think he'll clear 130 innings. If he clears 130 innings, he'll be a top 25 starting pitcher, I think, on quality. So it's not a good innings play, but it is a, early Hunter Green, early Spencer Strider type package where it is just a great fastball with a great slider and no real command issues. I think the only command issue I could think of is he doesn't command the changeup that well, and that's why he doesn't throw it as much. But, over time, he should be able to, harness that or a curve or something to put a little wrinkle on it. Maybe a sinker, maybe a cutter, maybe there's, there'll be something he's working on in spring to expand the arsenal. But when the beginning of your arsenal is this dominant, I think it's the kind of like closer for 5 or 6 innings type of package, but it's great.
Yeah, it's a fun player to have on your rosters. Tyler Glasnow goes in this range. The horrendous injury track record has finally brought the price down, which is great for me because I could maybe be disappointed again just at a lower price. I mean, I've been a Glasnow truther for a long time, and now I can get a discount and maybe be wrong again. Still pumping pretty big K rates and offering good ratios around the IL stints. It's just become really difficult to pencil in more than 130 innings. In the past, I'd probably tell you 150, 160 was my expectation at the high end because he was doing that, way back in 2017 if you lump the AAA innings with the Major League innings. That's how long ago it was. It was when Tyler Glasnow was still spending time at AAA. The stuff drop is kind of interesting. We talked about it last year at the beginning of the year. He did not look like typical Glasnow, but rerunning the numbers, it sounds like things look a little bit better for Glasnow.
Yeah, on the refresh, he had a 101 stuff plus. That's still down. But also, he's in that place where how relevant is Stuff Plus when he's striking out 29% of the batters he's seeing? He's a veteran guy. He's, we're not trying to outdo K minus BB and what he results on the field at this point. He's demonstrated who he is. And even Oopsie realizes that too, because with the 101 Stuff Plus, it gives him a 3.39 ERA projection. I've got him back in top 25, so I've got him a buy based on this ADP. Maybe that needs to drop, but I only gave him 129 innings, so I'm not giving him more than any of the depth charts. In fact, I'm giving him fewer than the depth charts. So with as few innings as he threw last year, he was still the 54th best pitcher, and I have to the difficulty is ranking for everybody. I mean, if you have IL stints, then a guy who was the 54th ranked pitcher for 90 innings. That slot on your team probably was a top 30 slot, because you're going to fill that out with something. Now, in NFBC, maybe it's even less than the top 50 pitcher because, the waiver wire is worse, and you had to play games with, am I keeping him on my roster or not? So I could see him being drafted as high as the sort of top 20 pitcher and as low as a top 40, top 50 pitcher, depending on your settings. But I'm still in. I think that the floor is around the 50th best starting pitcher. Maybe as I redo ranks, he'll drop a little bit. I like just think about Tyler Glasnow versus like Jacob Misiorowski or Emmet Sheehan, guys we're going to talk about later. Are you necessarily taking the young guys for more innings? And if you're not necessarily taking the young guys for more innings, then the young guys compound innings risk with production risk, just because we know more about Tyler Glasnow than we know about the young guys. So I think it's appropriate to take him ahead of some of the young guys we're about to see.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to illustrate what the tiebreaker would be, because their workload expectations are very similar. I was surprised in prepping for today's show that Brandon Woodruff, despite having anterior capsule surgery and missing all of 2024, has thrown more innings over the last 5 years in the regular season than Glasnow by 25. Like, that blows my mind, just because, I mean, like a full lost season with an injury that some guys just don't come back from. And it's interesting that after the long road back, Woodruff had a better strikeout rate and a better walk rate than Glasnow did last year. That was a big surprise. Maybe one massive shoulder injury is a little scarier than the combination of things that Glasnow has dealt with. That's kind of how I clock it in my head. I'm not sure if that's medically right or true. But that's just how my brain
Dr.
works.
Nick.
Yeah, I just think one major surgery is worse than 3 or 4 different things.
It's worse.
But
surgery
3 or 4
is worse.
different things being broken in your early 30s also doesn't seem great. These are like the lesser of two bad situations, I think, is the way you're looking at it from a health perspective. All that is to say, the thing that became really important for Woodruff was that his command had to hold up, and it did. His command was maybe even a little better than it was pre-injury. At least the eye test, I thought it was as good as it's ever been, and that's huge for him. He's added a cutter. He's made the kinds of adjustments that you need to make in order to not have top shelf stuff, but still get something close to top shelf results. So I'm just curious if you see the similarities between Woodruff and Glasnow in terms of per inning production being very good, but risk being heightened, and whether you think Woodruff is also a fair or good buy in the same range as you do with Glasnow at the discounted price.
I have Woodruff 49, so I have him as a pass. And here's my thinking. Brandon Woodruff is a whole new pitcher. I don't know how relevant old Woodruff is. For example, he doesn't throw his breaking balls anymore. So, if he breaks his breaking balls back next year, and that was just a early injury rehab type deal, then maybe we could start to compare Woodruff to pre-surgery Woodruff. But this is a totally new player. I was trying to think of a comp of a guy who throws 75% fastballs and a changeup. And, just on that, I came up with Merrill Kelly and Chad Patrick, which I would not be super excited about as comps. But then I was like, well, there is a very different arm angle. Maybe I should throw arm angle into this. And then I found a pretty good comp in Luke Weaver. And I don't know if you're looking at YouTube right now, these are pretty good comps in terms of arm angle, four seam, cutter, changeup in a lot of the same places. Weaver doesn't have a sinker, so Woodruff's four seam and sinker are a little bit different. Weaver's four seam is sort of splits the difference. They're not perfect comps, but it does just bring to mind that I think there's risk when you're looking at a pitch plot like this where there is nothing really in the bottom. There's nothing really that goes glove side. Everything goes arm side, and everything is up, and I don't know. I just think that this is a recurring theme. I just said it. I'm going to say it again. If you're compounding injury risk with production risk, that's when I get nervous. If I have injury risk and otherwise you're great, I'm in. If I have production risk, but I think you're good for the innings, I can be in. But if you do both, you're going to be lower on my rankings than you might expect.
So you're just not buying the 32.3% K rate and 5.4% walk rate. The projections
really
are
good.
pointing you to 24 to 26% K rates and 6.5 to 7.5% K rates, basically, which is still good. It's more of just, it's like a tier or two below where he's going if the projections are right.
It's kind of like it's kind of actually like Patrick and Kelly a little bit, like a 4-ish ERA.
Man, I'm going to link them together. I don't want them both on the same team, but if I'm shopping in this bin, I'm intrigued by both. I just can't take on the risk of both on the same team at the same time because I might be chasing real hard on the waiver wire. Sonny Gray goes in this mix. It's a deep arsenal, but the sweeper is still a huge part of how he gets a lot of whiffs, and he does get them on the curveball too. He returns to the AL East, struggled years and years ago with the Yankees. It didn't seem like a great fit for him in New York at the time, but back-to-back seasons now with a sub 6% walk rate. I think that eases the burden of home run issues. Do you think he can hang on for another year? I mean, if you use Sierra, I know you're not a big Sierra guy, but a lot of people like Sierra. 329 and 303 the last two seasons against ERAs of 428 and 384. Where do you think we are going from here with Sonny Gray as he's moving into those twilight years of his career?
I mean, the sweeper I just put on my top 10 list for MLB Now as one of the top 10 pitches in the game, and I still believe in it, and I think it's a great pitch. But, everything else is now below average by Stuff Plus other than the sinker. And the sinker is only there because he doesn't use it a lot. I think if he used it more because of the way Stuff Plus uses previous fastball mix, if people were expecting the sinker. Also, it doesn't really help him against lefties. And the big thing I'm worried about, actually, beyond the fact that he's headed towards Charlie Morton and Wainwright sort of territory, with the great breaking ball aging pitcher, that is fine, but it's not awesome for fantasy a lot of times. The other thing I'm really worried about is he's going from the 17th best park for lefties to the second best park for lefties. And, I talked to him a lot about Sonny Gray, about what happened when he was in New York, and I had a big piece that got aggregated, and it was a whole deal. And the focus of that piece was he was asked by the Yankees to throw his gyro slider, in the zone, because it was such a good pitch overall. They thought he could just throw it in the zone more often. And he said, well, that pitch is just my curveball thrown harder, and when I throw it in the zone, it doesn't work. So he was talking about a little bit about coaching effects and their analytics maybe being a little bit off or just not being a great fit for him. But I'm not nervous about him in a big market because I've seen him, at the biggest stage. I saw, 40,000 people in Oakland chanting "Sonny, Sonny," when he was in the playoffs against Justin Verlander. So it's not the stage that I'm worried about. It's that the underlying thing that happened in New York that is again true here is that the park was tough. Mm-hmm. Now I know
that to me was the bigger concern, not the. Yeah. It's Boston, and he struggled in New York because some guys just don't like New York for one reason or another. I mean, it's the park factors, the difficulty of the matchups, and yes, it's those factors that matter more. And
he had some good years in Cincinnati, so I know that's a tough park too. But in Cincinnati he was 93 plus, and now he's 92 minus. So, it's just everything's going to be a little bit harder in his third year in Cincinnati. He had a 4.19 ERA, and I could just see this being a kind of guy where the K minus BB for his whole career has been good, but the home run rate is gradually increasing, and I think that's indicative of players doing better when they guess right.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I think I'd rather be a year early on not having Sonny Gray on my teams than a year too late, especially because this is not an inexpensive price point. I can find other guys I like throughout this tier, throughout the next one, and if he falls a little bit, maybe I'm in. But at full price, I'm probably not drafting him at the current price.
Yeah, we have not talked about players that I have ahead of him. I have Sonny Gray in a little old man tier with Kevin Gausman, who's coming up next, and Kevin Gausman was just great last year, and I don't want to besmirch his name because I love that he's taken this 2-pitch mix so far, that he's a 35-year-old that just came off a 3.59 ERA and pitched well all throughout the season, but there's still declining strikeout rates for him that you can see pretty easily. Last year, he arrested a little bit of velocity decline, and I just worried what happens if he's back to 94 or what happens when he's 93.9, and what we saw at the beginning of his career was huge home run rates. And that's where I think the risk is for Kevin Gausman, is the velo starts to drop, and when they get a hold of his fastball, it's a homer more often. I mean, you actually see that in the projections. All of the projections have him for a higher home run per 9 rate than he's had in his career, higher than he's had in the last 5 years. And I think that's probably aging curve stuff. That's, if I had to guess, I would say it's aging curve stuff. But that's why they all have him for, it's pretty close to consensus. Zips has a 3.77 ERA for Gausman. But most of the rest of them have him basically for a 4 ERA and a 1.25 whip with league average strikeout rate. That is just, there are more exciting things I want to do with this point in my draft, because I've got 2 aces and I just don't know, like pitcher oatmeal. It can be exciting, but it can work. Like Seth Lugo was my pitcher oatmeal, but I want to buy my pitcher oatmeal later.
I think that's a good way to think about it. I was informed in our Discord that weird oatmeal is oregano on oatmeal, which happened.
That was
a college mishap. Reached for the cinnamon, got the oregano, ate it anyway. Apparently, it was a roommate of one of the kids.
I am not eating it with the oregano on it. Sorry.
I just would have made a new bowl and started over, even in college, or thrown like pepperoni and mozzarella cheese in there and turned it into like some kind of pizza oatmeal and seen if that was good. That probably wouldn't have worked either.
There might have been class starts in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so
I got to eat this. It's my last packet of oatmeal. I got to go. Emmet Sheehan is in this group. He kind of fits more into the exciting young pitchers that could maybe take a huge step. It's just so interesting because if you believe that the Dodgers are going to patch it together with the top end guys missing time, they need someone to hold that group together. Sheehan would be that someone, or at least one of those someones. Came back from hybrid Tommy John internal brace surgery, was really good after that loss 2024. K rate was above 30%, 15% swinging strike rate, so it kind of looks like he can sustain a K rate like that or close to it. Did it mostly with 3 pitches, 4-seamer, slider, and change. What did you see from Sheehan? Because it wasn't even 100 big league innings. It was a really nice line, but there's role questions because you might get good results over a decent number of innings, but it might just be kind of up and down in terms of how the usage works if they are in fact using him more as an extra guy as opposed to a fixture in their rotation.
Yeah, I'm mentally moving him down a little bit in my rankings. Not that you're a wet blanket or anything, but there is some innings risk here. I don't know if I did have a 129 for him, while the depth charts at Fangraphs have 145. So I already thought there's some risk there innings-wise. But now that I'm looking at it, it's even worse than I thought, because last year's 91, 92 innings was a career high. No, actually, in 2023 he had 120 between the big leagues and the little leagues. So, could you get to 150 off 120 before surgery? Yeah, I guess so. But I'm projecting for 130, and then there's this other risk again to think about compounding production with it's not injury risk necessarily as innings risk here. There's just a weird thing about him is that I think he's a changeup first righty, and that's been a guy that I've avoided in the past. I don't know if it's a result of never paddock, but if you look here at this table, this is Sheehan's stuff plus splits against right-handers. And normally I'm showing you opposite. Will it work? And against right-handers, his four seam is around average. His slider is below average, actually, for a fastball, for a slider. And his changeup is supposedly his best pitch, but he throws it, as sort of an afterthought. The slider is really interesting here because it's 101 stuff plus, which is below average for a slider. 101 location plus, which is all right. 108 pitching plus, which is fine. A 191 xwOBA, which is amazing. And so he's outperformed that pitch. And again, I would also point to how much of this is based on location. So his locations were really good against righties. Did you know that Emmet Sheehan had 30 present, 40 future command grades from Fangraphs?
I did not know that. I maybe have seen it before, but I did not commit it to memory.
Keith Law mentioned that he had reliever risk because of his command. So, so what if his slider is not as good next year because he doesn't command it as well, and he's a fastball changeup guy with an okay slider? I guess the model here is Ryan Pepiot, though. So that's actually very Pepiot-esque. So I like Pepiot. Why shouldn't I like Sheehan? I like Sheehan overall. The risk is up and down. What if he doesn't even start the season in the rotation because everyone's healthy? They want Roki Sasaki in the rotation, they say. What is the rotation? If everybody, and this might be miraculous that everyone's healthy to start the season, but if everyone's healthy, it's Yamamoto, Snell, Glasnow, Ohtani, Sasaki, and I guess Sheehan as the 6.
I think he's either the 5 or the 6. I mean, so he has a spot right now. I think there's more pressure. If it's not working, they've always got depth options. They've got Robleski or Knack or someone else they can throw out there. Eventually, River Ryan's healthy, and maybe he's part of the equation later in the year. I mean, just that's the downside, is they could change the role if they don't like what they're getting. So I get why people are into him based on the underlying skills. I just think there's a wide range of outcomes based on usage over the course of the year that could make him a little bit of a disappointment.
I do have him as a general buy. Even now I'm moving him down a little bit to the mid-30s. He's ahead of a lot of the guys we've talked about. So far, the highest ranked guy we've talked about other than Chase Burns and Tyler Glasnow. So those are my buys so far in this tier.
All right, Eno's in DVR, skeptical more about shape of season as it wears on, but definitely nice skills from Sheehan in 2025. Let's move over to the bottom part of Tier 3. Tier 3B, as we're calling it. Nick Lodolo, Zack Wheeler, Michael King, Pablo López, Ryan Pepiot, Gavin Williams, Cam Schlittler, Drew Rasmussen, Jacob Misiorowski, and Robbie Ray. Man, I feel like we're not going to get much further than this tier on this episode, but we're going to do our absolute best to make that happen. Lodolo, for the longtime believers who watch and listen to this show, they were rewarded. 156 and 2/3 innings last year, a good enough K rate at 24.3%, excellent walk rate under 5%. Maybe the ceiling's a little lower than we previously thought, but just being healthy for a full season or most of a full season was a pretty big deal. It's a near even mix of 4 pitches, and 3 of them look pretty similar by shape. The other doesn't really move the way you'd expect it to. It's a weird curveball just in terms of what hitters would typically expect from that slot. So I kind of think this works for Nick Lodolo. It's kind of funky, and as long as he doesn't have some kind of massive drop-off in velo or more health stuff, I think he can at least return this type of value again in 2026.
Yeah, I just wanted to show people what you mean by a weird curveball. And I think that the charts on Savant are pretty cool. I mean, one thing that I wish that they were was that the the average movement profile, the sort of shaded numbers, the shaded spots on the pitch movement charts were arm angle adjusted. But one thing that you can see is if you put your cursor on the arm angle and the arm angle shows up in the chart, you can immediately see which pitches are surprises given that arm angle. And with this one, what you see is, why doesn't that curve go further sideways? You know what I mean? It's almost like a slow gyro slider or something. Like it's really close to like kind of 0-0, or surprisingly close to 0-0 for a guy who has a 15-degree arm angle. When you see 15-degree arm angle, you think this guy's going to throw me a frisbee. This guy's going to throw me a sweeper. This guy's going to throw me something that's just sideways, goes forever. And he throws something that kind of clips and doesn't go as far sideways as you think. So it's a really interesting pitch. It stands out for me. And then just against all average curveballs, it's super weird too. You can see that on the chart as well. So I like Lodolo, and we shouldn't. The one thing that's hardest to do is just figure out, what do we think now about his injury risk, about a guy who we used to think, oh, this guy's a huge injury risk, and then he kind of puts it all together and does, gives you the volume you want. Do you just forget about the injury risk? How much does a healthy year help you? I don't know that the changeup's that good either, because it looks exactly like a sinker, but is only 7 miles an hour slower. But I think with everything that he's shown on the field, the only question for me is that injury component. I mean, we're talking about a Lodolo who before this year, his major league high was 115 innings. But to be fair, that year he threw another 7 or so innings in the minors, so that's 120 innings. 2023 was a particularly bad year, 41 innings in all that year. So that's what I'm circling. Is it a 41 inning year? Is it a 120 inning year? Or is it a 160 inning year? And there's a big difference there. You kind of hit the whammy sound if you get the 40 inning year.
I mean, I think when you're looking at it compared to veterans who are aging gracefully, I would say that's how we would describe Kevin Gausman at this point. Just turned 35 in January, pitched deep into the postseason, logged a ton of innings. I think my questions about someone who's been a workhorse coming off a season like that at that age are not that different than a younger guy who's had a couple of freak injuries, right? It was like a stress reaction, I think, in his leg that cost Lodolo a lot of time in the 40-ish inning season that you mentioned. So I do think that's the sort of like general comparison you're making is, are you more comfortable with an aging guy that's been through it many, many times before, or are you more comfortable with the younger starter that finally broke through and got away from all those health issues? Maybe it's, again, mixing and matching the risk. If 2 of your 9 starting pitchers have elevated injury risk, maybe one's an old guy, maybe one's a younger guy, and that's the smarter way to do it. I don't know if it's even necessary to make a distinction between the two. But
how do you navigate this tier so far without with a real, because I know there's some who are like, I just don't take injury risk guys. So you're not taking Strider, you're not taking Burns, he was injured last year, you're not taking Glasnow, you're not taking Woodruff. I guess you could take Sonny Gray.
Yeah, Sonny and Gausman. I mean, Gausman pitched through an injury, I think, in 2024, which is why he wasn't quite as good, right? So those would be the two guys that if you said, I'm worried about all the injuries. Sheehan, I mentioned the internal brace hybrid Tommy John from costing all 2024.
You're cutting yourself off of a lot of upside if you do that, though. I mean, you're taking some pretty boring pitchers compared to some of the other guys who are going here. Maybe that's the idea. Maybe that's good. I think, personally, I've said the YOLO yo-yo, so I wouldn't mind getting one of Gray or Gausman, or I'm sure there's going to be somebody in this next tier that kind of fits alongside them, along with a more exciting arm.
Yeah, I mean, Zack Wheeler right now is going down here. I think this is an easy subject to change based on further updates that we get over the course of spring training. And when healthy, top 5 type starting pitcher. I mean, he was still doing that even before the injuries came back to bite him. It was a right shoulder problem with a blood clot that was removed. Subsequently had surgery to treat venous thoracic outlet syndrome, the less the less severe of the two versions of thoracic outlet syndrome that we see pitchers deal with. So the similarities to Merrill Kelly,
if it's the nerve one, what happens is that you're like you're just dealing with it over time, and it just hurts, but it doesn't like stop your blood from pumping through. So like you can kind of, it can just get worse over time, right? Whereas with the blood one, like it's like a blood clot. You're just like, oh God, and like, you haven't done long-term damage. You just you went in there and you fixed a problem. So
it's like scarier in the sense if you didn't catch it, you might have a major medical issue on your hands. But I think in terms of recovering as a baseball pitcher, the less severe of the two is probably the better way to say it. But Matt Gelb was on MLB Network recently, and I thought it was interesting that he had an update on Wheeler that said he doesn't think Wheeler's going to be on the roster opening day, but it's going to be closer to April 1 than to June 1. And if he had to take a guess, he thinks it'd be sometime around May 1st. And he also added some details about Wheeler staying in Philly to do his rehab work with the team's medical staff throughout this offseason, and they're kind of encouraged by what they've seen so far. So good signs to this point, and given the ceiling, and given that it might only be a month instead of 2 or 3, I do think you're going to see Wheeler creep up at least into the 100 to 125 range, because 1 month off for a possible top 5 pitcher is a risk-reward balance that I think a lot of players are willing to take, even without the benefit of IL spots.
Yeah, not starting the season on the roster is a bigger deal the further down the rankings you go. This is a good enough pitcher where you could say, all right, I won't get him for 2 or 3 weeks, but I'll be fine with him afterwards. The reason I'm not that interested, again, going back to this theme of compounding injury with production risk, and that seems weird to say about Wheeler because he's been such an excellent player, but, when we say something like, well, Merrill Kelly, came back by opening day after his thoracic outlet, it was also the good version, and Merrill Kelly's been fine since then. I'd just like to point out that the first year that Merrill Kelly came back from thoracic outlet syndrome, he had his worst season of his career by ERA, strikeout rate, velocity, and his stuff was down year over year. The only thing I can say is the projections mostly put all that in. Like if he plays to his projections, he is going to play to one of his worst ERA, strikeout and velocity seasons of his career, and they still spit out basically like a 3.43 for ZiPS, with a 113 WHIP. So, if I'm saying I'm not sure he's going to come back and be Wheeler, what if he's 80 or 90% Wheeler? Is that better than most of the guys in this tier?
Yeah, 80 or 90% of Wheeler is still probably not that far off even from what Glasnow or Woodruff give you, right? I mean, I think that's the sort of like 3-player toss-up that we're going to eventually be looking at. So if you're in an early draft and Wheeler's still sitting in the range where he's been going, and you haven't taken on a lot of pitching injury risk, maybe there's actually more of a case there than I thought there would be back in November. It's just good to hear that things are progressing well for him.
I don't like taking guys, I don't like taking guys who aren't ready for the season. It's like the Tommy John thing where it's like I'd rather the guy had Tommy John, came back and showed me that he's ready to be on the field before I take him again. It's going to be hard for me to take Garrett Cole and Joe Musgrove in pitches in leagues this year. And I know that Luis Garcia on the Astros is not as good a pitcher as those guys. But I took him in draft and holds last year thinking, hey, he's super cheap. He'll make it back and give me innings sometime. Well, did anybody see how many innings Luis Garcia gave anybody last year? None, 0, zip. So there's too many things that can go wrong too over this time period. So if I'm drafting right now, I'm not taking Wheeler. And why might I take somebody like Michael King? Well, he came back and he pitched. I know he then had like a hamstring thing and he went back on the injury, but he also is not coming off a surgery. Like surgery is the other thing that I like to kind of avoid because, coming back from an injury where like your hamstring, we'll talk about Pablo López in a second. Those are strains, there's not a surgery involved. Michael King, yes, it was a nerve thing, but there was no surgery involved. So I just feel like, the rest, recovery, and rehab, it could have. It's just a shape of a season. He could have come back if the season was a month longer. You know what I mean? It wasn't that he needed to have a huge corrective surgery to figure this out. So I'm interested in Michael King and Pablo López maybe more than Zach Wheeler and the guys I mentioned like Garrett Cole and Joe Musgrove.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting part of the draft because what you did previously will absolutely dictate your risk tolerance in this range, but having a good plan for what to do if some of these guys slide more than you expect, I think is going to be really important. My quick thought on King is that things actually weren't as bad as they could have been last year since he was dealing with injuries. The nerve problem in his shoulder was the scarier of the two things, but he came back from that. Like, the order of the injuries also matters to me. If you had 2 injuries last year, and the more serious one was the one you came back from and pitched again before something else came up, to me that's the better case scenario than minor injury, come back, and then bigger injury, and we don't see you again. So
that's relevant to both these guys. I mean, the King was the nerve thing that was so scary first, and then it was like a hamstring knee thing or something, a knee injury when he came back, and I'm not as worried about that. And then Pablo López, it was a grade 2 teres major. That's like a big muscle in the shoulder. But it's still a muscle strain, which I like. And then a mild forearm strain. I mean, that could be a precursor to Tommy John. Pablo López could have Tommy John this year.
Yeah, anytime a forearm strain, flexor strain, anything like that comes up. I mean, I thought it was a nerve problem for Garrett Cole last year too, though. And I was too optimistic about that, and it backfired on me in a couple of places too. I'm lucky other people had a similar approach because I would have had Garrett Cole everywhere if I was alone in my optimism. So it's a tough pocket because of the different types of injuries we're talking about.
And I think that's why, for me, Ryan Pepiot kind of rises versus a lot of these guys.
Yeah, you're not answering health questions. I mean, López, the last thing on López real quick, former president of baseball operations, Derek Falvey, said in November that López was fully healthy and scheduled for a normal offseason. Like, it's a good sign, but it's not as good as having seen him at the end of the year, right?
Right.
But you're right.
They could
Pepiot,
go,
we
like
don't have
you
that
said,
concern.
with Wheeler, that can go, like with a good spring, that can go up. But you can't, it is just a peer-reviewed, researched fact that forearm strains are precursors to Tommy John. It's just there's a sort of kinetic chain thing where that's part of the chain, and it's pretty close to your elbow. It's not a great place to have a strain. So I do think that's worrisome. And what you got with Ryan Pepiot is like 2 years of really good health and no real health problems going back. And while he might feel oatmeal-y, I think there's some upside beyond what he's done so far. I do think that I wonder what this is not. We're not going to answer this right now. But Ryan Pepiot is how old is he? 28. Let me just make sure. 28. So he's 28 years old. Is he a 28-year-old or is he a pitcher with 376 innings in the major leagues? Is there like a difference between those two things, right? Because you tell me, okay, this pitcher who has had 2 good seasons and he's coming off a season where he was the 41st best pitcher in fantasy baseball, is also leaving a terrible home park that affected, his pitches and affected his splits. Like, I would say that he has upside to do better than that. Now, the projection systems may see him as a 28-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. And so maybe there's already some early aging happening here because most of the projections have him for 4s, low 4s. The bat has a 4.55. Oopsie, again, because I use that, not surprising, 3.73, good stuff plus. I did want to point out that, if anybody's like, oh, well, he had better ERA at home than on the road, so like, why would this change? I talked to Ryan Pepiot about throwing his pitches, in Tropicana or in the
it's Steinbrenner
I
Field.
talked to Ryan Pepiot about throwing his pitches in the Yankee Stadium, the minor league stadium they were using, and we've talked about this on Rates and Barrels all year, where the minor league stadiums have less of a wind, what's it called, like they're
lower. They're lower structures, so the wind takes more. It has more of an impact on fly balls in those stadiums.
But not only fly balls, Ryan Pepiot said they would look up at the screen to see how their pitches were moving. And what we found is that Stuff Plus, Pitcher's Stuff, and Stuff Plus does best in domes. And that's because there's no crosswinds. It's basically a lab environment. Your pitches are doing what you expect them to do, and you train them to do certain things. So your Stuff Plus is best in that. And that's part of why the Rays have always had good Stuff Plus. Now, they also have an early Stuff Plus adopter as a team, and they went and tried to get pitchers that had good Stuff Plus. So it's about acquisition, scouting, trading, developing, and the park. So it's all of that. But look at Ryan Pepiot's splits a home and away. Yes, home, he had a lower ERA. Home, he had a 1.7 homers per 9. And what he did was he really upped his strikeout rate because he was like, I need to strike everybody out because if I don't strike them out, I can get up a homer, right? It worked out all right for his ERA, but his home stuff, I looked at this, his home stuff was a 104 Stuff Plus and his away was 109. So I'd expect his Stuff Plus to actually be better next year. And I expect his results to be better. And I think he's going to, this is a feel thing, but I think he's going to beat that 3.7 projection he has for the last 2 years. He has, at least he did in 2024 when he was calling the Trop home. So I'm expecting like a 3.5 ERA with 26, 27% strikeout rate from Ryan Pepiot. Like, I think this feels a little bit to me like the third year of a position player, who's playing regularly. I've been talking about that. I think this could be a takeoff. Plus, worst case scenario, what does he give you? Like a 3.7, 3.8 with 180 innings and a bunch of strikeouts? Like, you're taking other guys where you'd love to get that many innings in this tier.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about waiting a little bit for oatmeal, this would be kind of part of that. I think Pepiot is a lot more exciting to me than Gray or Gausman, some of the guys that go ahead of him. So he's a good reason not to take those guys at their price. If they all get lumped together because the older guys fall, then maybe it becomes a more difficult decision. But I don't know why the projections are pushing so hard on Pepiot's ERA. I think sub-4 makes a lot of sense, especially with the move back into the Trop. And I think you're right to call out the possibility of more Ks too. He doesn't have to do it to be good value, but you get that possibility baked in. So I'm all in on Pepiot at the price. He's been a longtime favorite of yours, longtime favorite of mine. I wanted him to get chances before they traded him to the Rays. I thought the Dodgers were going to give him a shot in the back of that rotation, and he's getting that long run now with Tampa Bay. A former favorite of ours is in this group. Gavin Williams is living the dangerous life with too many walks. He ran a tidy BABIP, 254 last year. That kept the ERA down at 306, but he had a 127 whip. I think the latter is a better indicator of his true talent level. I think usually when you see a 127 whip, you're going to see an ERA that starts with a 4. Maybe he can be a high 3s guy. Like, that's always possible. Part of the problem is that we're just not getting the swing and miss from Gavin Williams that we expected based on what he did in his run through the Guardians minor league system. I guess I have to spin this question a little bit differently, thinking about the conversation we just had about Ryan Pepiot. Could we get something to the effect of, we've seen it for basically 3 seasons in the big leagues, or two seasons worth of innings stretched over 3 years from Williams. Could we see that consolidation where maybe he's kind of found his floor and now he can start to add on to what he's done to this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a fundamentally underlying his numbers. There are numbers that aren't as exciting for Gavin Williams. Like his K-minus BB is worse, his Sierra is worse. These are predictive numbers. And just a note, you mentioned that the whip is a surprisingly predictive number. I know our own John Legesa wrote an article about how predictive whip is, and whip was the first tool I ever used when I played fantasy baseball, and I started in the early 2000s. I just picked pitchers with good whips that had bad ERAs the year before, and it's not a terrible way of looking at things. But the other thing is just like his strikeout minus walk rate. That is a super powerful number. It was below average last year, and I know that he throws a cutter, and cutters do lead to lower BABIPs, so maybe that's why he has lower BABIP. But even the projections kind of are catching on to that to some degree. All the projections have him for like a 280-ish BABIP. They're not giving him a 300 or whatever. So they're giving him that, and they're still getting these high 3s, low 4s, ERA numbers. And just overall, I think the last thing is let's not forget Gavin Williams' history. And I think it, reminds me a little of Lodolo, but maybe it's worse because 2024, he had 76 innings, and the reason why was elbow inflammation. And it was multiple bouts of elbow inflammation. There were shutdowns and setbacks due to elbow inflammation and soreness. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. That just seems like a warning sign to me. Like this is a hard thrower who's had elbow problems.
I get why people would still be a little bit interested, but I think I like a few of the other options around this tier more than I like Williams at this point. I kind of want to see it happen. He can break out on someone else's roster, I guess, because I was trying to get that to happen in past years, and it just hasn't happened yet.
I like when I pick a sleeper that's like, oh, yeah, it's got a stuff plus sleeper. I like to pick the stuff plus sleepers when like the other models agree a little bit too. Like it's really great when you get a guy where you're like, oh, stuff plus K minus BB and Sierra all say he's good. Like, all right, I like that guy as a sleeper.
I think when that happens, prices go up. When all those systems agree, everyone sees that and goes, oh, good, we can be confident in this, so we should be more confident in this. Cam Schlittler goes in this range. I think it's interesting that projections all call from a drop in K rate. He was at 27.6% in his debut at the Yankees. Steamers got him all the way down at 22.3, Oopsie at 24.8. But strong strikeout rates in the upper levels. I mean, I think there's maybe whether it's a control issue or a willingness to issue a walk in order to temper homers. That's a conversation I've never had with Cam Schlittler, so I'm not sure. But he hasn't had a walk and homer problem at the same time, so that's probably worth noting. Postseason run, probably feeling a little bit of hype here too. This is kind of like the Emmet Sheehan situation for me, where I look and I think like he's got a spot right now. Will he have a spot all year? What will the shape of Cam Schlittler's season look like? That's sort of like the headspace I'm in when I look at him. Are you in on Schlittler based on the injuries they're dealing with right now? Cole and Rodon are both down, so the early part of the season looks good. They traded for Ryan Weathers, but Weathers has had a really difficult time staying healthy, and even some of their depth guys like Heel and Schmidt have had major injuries cost them time too. So where do you fall on Schlittler?
Yeah, I think that him versus Trey Yesavage is a really interesting, and Jacob Misiorowski and them, But the one problem is that Cam Schlittler does have one of the hardest home parks of any of them. It is a tough park to come up in, and people take their lumps eventually in that park. I feel like, just it took forever. Clark Schmidt, Will Warren, a lot of these guys have taken a long time to establish themselves in that park. And maybe Schlittler has the best stuff out of any of them, but there is a disconnect between Cam Schlittler's stuff and his results last year. It doesn't show immediately when you look at ERA, but look at this chart here. So his sweeper stuff plus was 136, really great. This is even the refreshed one. So, it's a hard sweeper. Its expected whiff rate based on its pitch characteristics was 36%. He got 11.8. So that's weird. Then his curve, also good stuff plus numbers. Expected whiff 28.5%. He got 21.8. So he got his whiffs from his cutter and his four seam and his sinker. Even his cutter had a higher expected whiff rate than his actual whiff rate. The fastballs did better. And I wonder, okay, is that just like he came up and he developed the sinker over the course of last year, and so it really surprised hitters. It was it was a new scouting report people had to come up with. Oh, he's got two fastballs now, and they're both great, and so you have to really stay on top of that. And so he was like, oh, I've got two fastballs now. Don't worry about it. I don't need to throw the sweeper very much, and he didn't. Maybe that's still in his pocket, right? And maybe the sweeper whiff rate will go up as he throws it more and gets more comfortable with it. Maybe the model's just wrong and his breaking balls aren't as good as the model thinks they are. But there is a slight disconnect there with the model and how many whiffs he's expected to get. I kind of lean towards the model, just thinking, he developed a sinker, and then I think he's going to be a true 5-pitch pitcher going forward with power and not a terrible command. That sounds like a really good pitcher. Like, I think his ceiling is way better than Will Warren and Clark Schmidt's. I think his ceiling is this. If people ask me sometimes, like, who could jump out of this tier and be like a top 25, top 15 pitcher next year? Cam Schlittler's on that list for sure.
Yeah, and as I think about that depth chart, I think it's more currently broken than the Dodgers depth chart, which affords a longer runway early on for Schlittler to just get going.
He gets a whole month while
that
Carlos
spot.
Rodon's hurt, right? Like he at least gets that.
I think they like him better than Warren, Schmidt, and Gila anyway, regardless of the health of everybody in that group too. So
Yeah.
it's a good sign. So he's intriguing where he goes. I'm not sure I'm pushing him up a lot because of just the need to do it over a full season. But I think there's a lot of ways Cam Schlittler can take that step forward, as you highlighted there. Drew Rasmussen goes in this range. 3 major elbow surgeries over the course of his time pitching. I think that goes all the way back to college, but he is so good on a per-inning basis. He's got a sub-3 ERA in each of the last 5 seasons. You don't get a ton of Ks to go along with it. Low probability of 180-plus innings in a season to make up that difference in volume. But, man, either way, if you're just looking for a great ratios play, Drew Rasmussen, where he's going, continues to deliver.
Yeah, the model refresh wasn't super kind to him. He did lose some stuff plus in the refresh. I don't know why, but the model still loves his 4-seam, sweeper, and sinker. Those are all 113, 114 stuff plus type pitches. It even likes his changeup. I don't know why. And the cutter, with the 99 stuff plus, you might think, well, that's not a great pitch. That's pretty good for a cutter. Plus, it's one of his primary pitches. He threw it 728 times against 819 for the 4-seam. So when you throw something that hard that often, then you have to kind of clump it more together with the fastballs, and to have basically 3 fastballs that are above average by stuff plus, that's what he's doing. And he's pairing it with a sweeper, and I think a curve could take a step forward next year, because this is a guy with 3 breaking balls that's coming off surgery. How many breaking balls did he throw during his, rehab for his surgery? Did he get better feel for those pitches over the course of the season? I don't know. I know there's a question in the Discord, and we're going to ask Jeff Zimmerman about this. That is there like a honeymoon for TJ? Is there a grace period where you have the surgery and you're good for 2 to 5 seasons? And I hear that question, and Jeff Zimmerman in the past has suggested that does exist. But I've also recently heard from him that he's taken that back and he doesn't think it exists anymore. So, I would love to put that question to him, and we will have Jeff Zimmerman on soon to talk about it, as well as Jordan Rosenlund to talk about OOPSI projections. So some of your questions about what goes into these projections and what's behind them will be answered. I would say that I put fewer innings down for Drew Rasmussen than the depth charts. In my rankings, I put him down for 155 at the time. I think the depth charts had 171 down. I'm going to now actually manually, right now in front of you, make that 140. I still think, he's a top 30 type pitcher. I think he needs to go, because he's so excellent on a per inning basis. I think he needs to go where Glasnow, Snell, Burns, those type of guys go, because yes, they may not give you a ton of innings, but they may be in innings that start with, the ERA might start with a 2.
I'm just chuckling in my own head. I'm imagining you sitting on a stage with your laptop, kind of like a piano player might at a concert, just making changes to your projections and having them pop up on a screen, and then just an auditorium full of people just cheering as the numbers
I moved
change.
Freddie Peralta up for you a little bit yesterday.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that. Speaking of Brewers, well, at least a current one instead of a former one, Jacob Misiorowski really was the king of Milwaukee after 3 big league starts, and the story had a few interesting chapters. People were mad that he was an all-star. I get it. I think the all-star game should be about fun at this point, since what's the point otherwise? But that's neither here nor there. There was a comebacker to the shin in a start against the Cubs that may have impacted him a little bit in the second half, but we saw what he could do in the postseason. 12 innings of 2-run ball against the Cubs and the Dodgers. This stuff is just absurd when he's got the command of it. And I think the 2 questions about Misiorowski are mostly command and workload related. The command Still a work in progress, but the stuff is so good that I'm willing to say, let's just see where this goes. I'll worry about that part later. The workload was better than you'd think last year. 141 and a third innings between his time at AAA Nashville and his regular season and postseason innings with the Brewers. So you see a 141, you're not really looking at a tight cap, at least not the kind of cap where you're losing large chunks of time. If he's healthy, he's going to pitch a lot like a regular starter. Maybe it's more 5-inning starts because the days where the command's not there, he runs high pitch counts. Where do you fall on Miz? He's part of the exciting, it kind of starts at McLean and Burns and kind of runs down to this part of the board. Yesavage is part of that too. Like, how does Misiorowski stack up against the other young starters that we saw break through last season?
I like him better than Sheehan. And I like him better than Schlittler. And I have him right behind Nolan McLean and Chase Burns. And I like this innings projection to some degree. I mean, 71 and a third in 2023, 97 and a third in 2024, 123. It seems like a nice, steady progression. It seems like I have a 149 put down from this year. That would be either a minor kind of hamstringy type injury or maybe just a, we'll send him down around the All-Star break and keep him stretched out, but not working as hard type deal where you just get him to 150 innings and you have him for the postseason. And I don't know. Am I worried that his fastball command is bad? I would be, except that he throws a 94-mile-an-hour slider that he can command. He absolutely can command that. And would I be worried that, yeah, and would I be worried that teams could lock in on the slider and hit the slider? Yeah, except it's a 94-mile-an-hour slider. It can't be like that easy to hit. So I see a guy who will basically use the slider as his regular pitch, the four seam as a whiff pitch, and then I think any sort of progression he can make with the curveball and changeup, that's how he marches his way towards ace-dom. Absolute ace stuff. A lot of comparisons here with Jake DeGrom, not with the command, I understand, but in terms of extension, hard slider, good secondary pitches, amazing strikeout rates, the body to some extent, there's a reason that DeGrom is a comp for this guy. So I'm pretty much all in. I know that I have biases where I get in trouble sometimes with guys with low command, but he put up a 104 location plus. I don't think his command's that bad.
Yeah, I just think it kind of drops out on him sometimes, though, and then you're just like, oh, man, you got to find those mechanics, big fella. I do hope a full off season of cheese curds and concrete mixers helps him get a few extra pounds on the frame, if that's the goal. It's the easiest way to get it. He lives in the right place to pull that off. Not surprisingly, I like Misiorowski this year, and I think he's going to be pretty important to this Brewers team trying to stay atop the NL Central. Robbie Ray is the last of this tier, showed off his workhorse ability again last year. I mean, had a TJ and bounced back in a pretty big way. You're still going to get Ks. I think he's kind of similar to Gausman, and it's weird that they're still in the same cohort because they got almost identical contracts in the same offseason going into 2022. The stuff is eroding a little bit for Robbie Ray. That happens as you move through your 30s. This just looks like your classic good old-fashioned oatmeal, and I tend to like my oatmeal in a place like San Francisco where the home park is very kind.
Yeah, weirdly, he had almost the exact same ERA on the road as he had at home last year, Robbie Ray did, and you wouldn't think that about a guy who pitched for the Giants, but you did point out 14 of his 22 homers were allowed on the road. I wouldn't expect that split to continue. There was a couple things that I liked about what he did. He started to do some of the old player playbook, which was throw the changeup more, throw the knuckle curve more, diversify, even though he knows, and we all know that his four seam is his best pitch. I think that to some extent his slider was overrated in the past, and this work to kind of diversify his secondaries was important for him in terms of lengthening his career. So I'm not sure that I love him in terms of what's the likelihood he beats a 4 ERA? If you need your guy to beat a 4 ERA, I'm not sure that you will do that on the season. If you need to pitch him all the time, I'm not sure you will do that. And then there are going to be other pitchers that you can pitch half the time that'll be available later, right? So if you think that, you have to have somebody who has a below 4 ERA, and the only way you can do that is pitch Ray only at home, then you kind of have to mentally change his innings pitched for you to 90.
I think you're sitting him within the division, just at the Dodgers, probably sitting him for his Coors starts, which is true of a lot of guys that go around this range.
Do you play him against the Padres?
Yeah, in San Diego, I probably would. Right. I mean, pitcher-friendly park, lineup is good, not amazing.
Diamondbacks?
So. Yeah, I'm okay.
Right.
That could change over the course of the year. I want to see what this version of that D-backs lineup looks like. So
but you think you can get 120, 130 innings out of it?
Yeah, I think it's not just a straight up only at home situation. I think it's just used with a little bit of caution on the road right now with Ray and see how he adjusts. So he's okay where he's going. There's a few guys that go in this next tier we're going to get to, and I think he kind of fits in as part of that cluster just fine. ADP tier 4A. We're going to get down to pick 175, and then we're going to have to end this episode. So
oh my God, we had more pitchers after that?
There's a whole, the rundown just goes on forever. This group includes Nathan Eovaldi, Bubba Chandler, Trey Yesavage, Tatsuya Imai, Sandy Alcantara, MacKenzie Gore, Luis Castillo, and Ranger Suarez. Those last two are the two I'm looking at and going, yeah, Robbie Ray's a little bit more like those guys than some of the younger fireballers that we were talking about in the first two tiers today. Nathan Eovaldi, a common thread on many good teams in 2025 because a 1.73 ERA and .85 whip over 130 innings when it doesn't cost you much does a lot of good. He's shown some really nice walk rates in the back half of his career, and I think unless you're buying a full rebound in K percentage, the projections are naturally going to nudge him back to a mid to high threes ERA and probably like a 118 to 120 whip. That's still really good on a per inning basis. And actually, if you're comping that to the ratio expectations of Robbie Ray without the most difficult road starts in, they're probably pretty similar. And maybe you're not doing as much manipulation of Eovaldi in your lineup. It's more just like letting him pitch when he's healthy. And I think it's also a little easier right now to be in the AL West than it is to be in the NL West as a non-Dodger.
Yeah, that park keeps playing more and more pitcher friendly, and I don't expect a 1.73 ERA or whatever, but he has been just excellent when he's been in. There's been over the course of his career a real softening of the stuff in the second half, and you've seen his velo drop in the second half. So, I don't know what that means. I mean, I think in like a draft and hold, you want to take Nate Eovaldi and maybe pair him later with like a prospect where you're like, oh, I got Nate Eovaldi for the first half and hopefully the prospect for the second half or something. Like I just I don't think that you and usually he likes to he will be ready for the start of the season. So I like that he's ready to begin the season, but the innings for him. What do I have for him? I think I probably. I have 148 for him, and that's just I'm changing that number right now. I'm going to 133.
The crowd in the auditorium goes wild, or they groan in sadness because they want to see the bigger total from Nathan Eovaldi. Yeah, I just think the market is kind of cautiously pricing him up a little compared to last year, but relative to what he did, he's still not as expensive as you'd expect because of all the injuries he's dealt with over the course of his career. It's a little bit like the MacKenzie Gore second half fade problem, just in a guy we've seen in the big leagues a lot longer. Bubba Chandler goes in here, and this time last year, I was under the impression that he might follow the Pirates timetable for the Paul Skeens promotion, where we'd see him mid-May, and I thought he was going to be a big part of their potential push toward relevance last year. Think about it from the perspective of what you were saying earlier. When you have someone else that's in the lineup when he's out, that spot was phenomenal. You probably
actually it gets a little bit worse in his case because he was at a 1.73 ERA, right? So whoever you put in there afterwards can only break the ERA up.
Well, but it dings him for the missed time, and like if you got a 3.5 out of whoever else he got for the rest of the time. Like that's huge. Like he was so good for the price.
Yeah.
He was probably the 50th or 60th starting pitcher drafted in most leagues. So total bargain. Let's talk about Bubba Chandler, though, for a minute. He seemed to me this time last year, I thought he was going to be on the timetable that they used for Skeens. Bring him up in May, get his innings in the big leagues, slow play him at first, and he wobbled at AAA. He had a 148 whip that delayed the promotion until the late second half. Got to 131 in the third innings, which I think is important when you're thinking about forecasting his workload. The walk rate was weirdly good during his brief time in Pittsburgh, 3.2%. I don't think he's a plus command control guy that's going to run the lowest walk rate in the league. No one expects that. But given that the Pirates are clearly making that all-in push toward getting a wild card spot this year, and in their way at least, he should break as a regular part of the rotation, right? And coming off of 131 and a third last year, 160 innings seems like a reasonable built-in expectation. The question is just how good will those innings be if you're buying into a steady workload from Chandler at the big league level?
Yeah, Bubba Chandler came up in our discussion with Keith Law, and somebody might have noticed that I said something about Stuff Plus not liking his breakers, and I was wrong. But Keith, I was directionally right, I'll call it. Because Keith pointed out that he always thought that Bubba's changeup was better than his breaking balls, and he should split his breaking balls. And I'm throwing up a chart right now that speaks to that issue, which is that, Bubba was predicted to have a 37% whiff rate on his changeup based on its pitch characteristics, and he had a 40%. That's fine. His four-seamer was predicted to have a 25% and had a 31%. That's fine. His slider was predicted to have a 49% whiff rate and had a 23% whiff rate. And his curve was predicted to have a 44% whiff rate and had a 9% whiff rate. And they slugged his curveball. And I think we won't see it again. Even though the model's okay on it, I agree with what Keith was saying. The movement is just not that different from the slider. It's just a slower version of the slider. So I think he'll be four-seam changeup slider. And I think the real question will be, will he get all that he can get out of that slider? Will that slider turn into a real weapon against righties? I think this matters because there are more righties than lefties. Why would like we used to talk about, does this pitcher have a changeup? Does this pitcher have a changeup? Why is does this pitcher have a breaking ball all of a sudden? But you still have 2 times as many righties as lefties to face, so you really want to be able to dominate righties. The last 3 starts for Bubba Chandler were just amazing. Against the Nationals, Athletics, and Braves, he put together 20 strikeouts, 0 walks, and 2 earned runs in 16 2/3 innings. I mean, just a masterful way to finish the season, and I think that represents his upside. So I don't have any problem with taking him here. Even if my ranking for Chandler is a little bit weaker, I have him back into the top 50. If you are in a 10 or 12 team league, then you push those guys up and you push the Kevin Gausman types down.
There's definite helium potential, though, too, if he comes into Florida and just tears up spring training, isn't walking anybody, strikes out more than a batter per inning. Like that momentum's going to be there, and he'll close the gap on some of the other young starters that are in this group. But I think you could say this is a FOMO yo-yo opportunity, where if you miss out on the earlier guys that we talked about, if you miss out on Burns, McLean, or Misiorowski, Sheehan, and you still want to have someone that could have crazy growth potential, Chandler still ticks those boxes. So especially if he stays down here, I think that's a great backup plan to have. Trey Yesavage is down here right now too. I'm actually surprised he doesn't go a little bit earlier, because we saw what he could do at the end of last season, especially in the playoffs. Not a ton of innings, but enough where we were all hyper focused on it to like look at it and say this could be really interesting. It's a really high arm angle, right? Slider moves in on same-handed hitters. The splitter is filthy when it's on. We saw a day in the playoffs where that splitter wasn't on and he had to cope with it. So that's sort of the what could go wrong. To me, a fourth pitch or improved command would go a really long way here. 150-ish innings seems reasonable. The Jays are loaded up with depth in a way where they can cover some gaps for Trey Yesavage however they see fit. So That's kind of interesting to me, just in terms of a workload cap that might be a hair lower than some of the other young starters we've talked about. But coming out of the impressive run at the end of last season and in the playoffs, where do you fall now on Trey Yesavage?
I ended up putting him right behind some of the other young guys. I have him behind Sheehan. I have him behind Misiorowski. Right now, I have him slightly ahead of Schlittler just because of that park that I mentioned. And because Sheehan is projected for a 30%, Yesavage is projected for a 29%, 30% type strikeout rate. So I love that about him. I love the strikeouts. I want the strikeouts. I want guys to strike guys out. But there really is no comp for Yesavage's slider. It's really weird. If you limit people to high arm angles and then you look for arm side movement off of this high arm angle, you get 3.4 inches of arm side movement for Yesavage, 1 inch of arm side movement for Brock Burke, and 0.3 for Robbie Ray. And then on top of that, Robbie Ray and Brock Burke are more like 47, 48 degree arm angles, and Trey Yesavage is at like 62. I mean, this is one of the most extreme arm angles in baseball. I think it'll run for a long time. I actually do think that the comp here is Tim Lincecum. I think this will be something that'll be amazing and awesome for a short amount of time, and it will cause him injury risk at some point.
Yeah, it's working so far for Trey Yesavage, but like I said, I'm surprised he's available down in this pocket and not going up in that McLean-Burns sort of range, given what
That's
he did
when it mattered most. Yeah, I have him top. I have him like 32 right now.
Well, knowing that and knowing that people are still starting to dive into their prep, like there's a very good chance that Yesavage makes that sort of leap. I know you liked Tatsuya Imai before he signed in Houston. That doesn't mean you don't like him because he landed in Houston, but the price changed. Once he had a team, once we knew for sure that he was headed to the big leagues.
Contract also is a big signifier as to how the league values this individual.
Yes. So you look at Imai right now, and the innings in his final 4 years in Japan, 59 and 2/3, 133, 173 and a third, 163 and 2/3. Really not bad, but some injuries in there that you would be mindful of. So you're probably not saying 180 plus because he hasn't done that in the last 4 years. So the Astros probably aren't going to push him quite that hard. But in terms of the park fit and the stuff, what do you think year one brings for Imai?
I think he's going to be good, man. There's some issues with a possible dead zone on the four-seamer, but it is a two-plane four-seamer, so it's kind of one of those pitches that has aspects of a four-seam and has aspects of a two-seam to it, and I think it's not. I don't think it's quite dead zoney, so I'm going to give him, like as a general comp, a little bit of a Luis Castillo in Cincinnati vibe. I think that he's a competitor that has a really good split finger and he has the Trey Yesavage weird reverse slider as well. So I think that people will have a real hard time with him at first. Now, will it last forever? I don't know. The strikeout rates in Japan went from pedestrian in Japan to above average. They're not the types of strikeout rates that you saw from Masahiro Tanaka when he came over. Actually, it's not too bad. It's closer to Masahiro Tanaka than it is to like Yu Darvish and some of the top end strikeout rate guys before they came over. So I just expect him to have a high floor, to be a competitor. I expect him to beat these projections.
Yeah, so maybe a little more of an established veteran type because of his previous experience as a pro in Japan.
With the wrinkle of like, people haven't seen this.
Right.
It's going to be like a low slot guy with a little bit of ride and a little bit of tail with a great splitter off it and then a reverse backup slider. Like there's not really a great comp for this. Not really a guy you can circle and be like, oh, it's going to look like this. So I think that's going to be hard on batters.
2026 only, Ryan Pepiot or Tatsuya Imai?
I'm taking Pepiot.
Okay. Just wanted to quantify to get someone else we liked for like kind of similar expectations.
For my would you rather is Imai versus Gausman. I have Imai right after Strider and ahead of Sonny Gray. They're like that's a little bit of a tier of like, they're going to give me innings. I think there's some upside here with the innings. There's more upside above them. You know what I mean? So I think he's going to be a pretty good pitcher.
I think I've said it a handful of times too, so I'll just make the broader point. Spring training, in my experience, has a greater impact on how we look at pitchers than how we look at hitters in terms of what people are willing to pay on draft day. So that's also going to be a factor in this. Like, to the moon is like a possibility for guys that go throughout this episode if spring looks good enough. Like, that's actually something you have to keep in mind too. If you're listening to this in February and your draft isn't until March, things can change a lot with this group in particular. Sandy Alcantara, man, I took the bait last year. It looked good in the spring too. I think by the model, it looked
not all spring
similar.
information is good.
Not all spring information is good. Not all great spring results lead to great things in the regular season. I thought he looked enough like himself where we were getting a good discount. And if you kept waiting and thinking things were clicking in season, you left him in your lineup all year, you got a 5.36 ERA and a 1.27 WHIP over 174 and 2/3 innings. And I hate to break it to you, but you also didn't get a ton of Ks for that many innings either, because he had a 19.1% strikeout rate after surgery. And it dipped before surgery too. Part of the way Sandy always used to get there in the past was just absurd workloads, and I don't think the Marlins have any hesitation about pushing him. He's down to
It's a pretty big workload for coming right off of surgery.
They just let it rip. I mean, they got 1 year before a club option that they would likely pick up. He's still a trade candidate. But is it going to be good? Like, how many sub 20% K rate guys are you drafting before pick 200 goes by?
Yeah, let me handle that one real quick, is because in the second half of the season, he finally got the command of his slider back. You can see that in Sandy Alcantara's location plus numbers on his slider. You can see it on the usage numbers on his slider. He started actually using a slider in the second half. And, I think he just generally got the command back on his breaking balls as things went on. And in August and September, he had a usable ERA and he had a 23% strikeout rate. So I'm going to give him that 23% strikeout rate. And I'm going to give him 180 innings. And I think it's going to be a pretty good ERA too. So it's not the greatest package to have in a league with innings caps or anything like that. But I can't point to a season where I think he can do this exactly. But in 2022, he had a 23% strikeout rate. I think he can do that. I don't know if he's going to have a 2.28 ERA again. So I'm going to go with and I know this is going beyond the projections here, but I'm going to go with like a 3.6-ish ERA, a 23% strikeout rate, and a return to form, and then a trade.
Okay, well,
an
that's
August
not
trade.
bad at this price. I think I'm going to want to see the slider again this spring, make sure it's still there. I think I'm just going to let him go by for these next few weeks. And if it gets more expensive because it looks so good, then we'll reevaluate accordingly. But I like that you're optimistic about him, because it really seemed like he was fighting it for most of the last season. And I think maybe just feeling good again, having the confidence in that slider. If it's the last thing that came back for him, that could be the key that unlocks it all again for Sandy Alcantara. MacKenzie Gore was heavily discussed after his trade to Texas on this show, but in case you didn't hear that episode, I think the couple takeaways I have are the defense should be better because the Nats defense is horrible. The park is playing more pitcher-friendly, so that should help. There's risk in the whip because he's always walked guys. MacKenzie Gore just below a 10% walk rate for his career at 9.7%. It's interesting to me that projections are all saying career best whip on the horizon, because it's just like, oh, okay. It's kind of by a lot, too, right? I think it's like in the 1-2 range from all the projection systems.
I mean, he has a 140 career whip.
Yeah.
135 last year, and the projections are for like 124, 123.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, like, I think the team context and the past pedigree as a prospect, those are the reasons why the price keeps ticking up right now, and I can understand why that's going to deliver some safer floor. But, man, like, do you think it's all going to click in year one in Texas for MacKenzie Gore?
I mean, he is surging right now in ADP. I looked up just since the trade, and he's moved into the top 50 starting pitchers since the trade. And I had him, at 70-something. I'm moving him up mentally now, and now that I, have now that I'm looking at it further, like, yeah, does he look decent next to a Tanner Bybee or, a Luis Castillo or Gavin Williams? We're talking about, 3.8s on their projections, more strikeout rates for MacKenzie Gore than some of those guys. So I think back end top 50 is actually, the market's pretty good at this. They're doing a good job here. But, the second half fades for me on MacKenzie Gore are a bit of an issue. Also, when I look at the arsenal, I see a good fastball, and I'm not sure I see anything else that's that great. Robbie Ray has made a great career with a similar package, right? Where it's a great fastball, not that great secondaries, good strikeout rates, not that great command. Could there be, and Robbie Ray took like a big leap forward at one point in his career. So could this be the MacKenzie Gore great leap forward that puts him in that kind of Robbie Ray territory? Totally could be. I guess I don't have like a great reason to circle that I'm not really targeting MacKenzie Gore. It feels a little bit like the market's more excited than I am.
Yeah, I think we share that current read on Gore, but we'll see where things are at in spring, see if he brings something new to the table as he gets underway in Arizona with the Rangers. Luis Castillo, feels like we're flirting with a cliff here. 3-year low in K percentage at 21.7%. Another year with a good walk rate, though. Tons of innings, pitcher-friendly home park. He's making it work for now. 2.60 ERA last season at T-Mobile, 4.71 on the road, thanks to a 3.56 WOBA from opposing hitters on the road. I think he has to fall from here for me to be interested. Do you glue him in with the same tier as the Gausman Ray types, or do you think there's actually a break before you get to Castillo?
Remember, I'm low on Gausman. So.
Yeah, no, but are you putting them together, or do you think this is another year older
right there
and worse?
in the most boring tier ever? Oh my goodness! So after Tatsuya Imai, this is what my rankings are. I mean, Strider represents upside, so he doesn't count. So I'll go after Strider. After Strider, it goes Gausman, Gray, Gavin Williams, Luis Castillo, Tanner Bybee, Brandon Woodruff, Cade Horton, Shane Bieber, Carlos Rodon, Sandy Alcantara, Robbie Ray, Aaron Nola. Boom. Oatmeal. That's my oatmeal tier. I'm okay with all those guys. I'll take one. I'll generally this is the type of thing that I do in my drafts where I'll be like, you know what? I need a high innings veteran, and then I'll put 5 of those guys in my queue. And when I get down to 2 or 3 guys in my queue, I take one.
Okay. I
think that's the use case, because just like Robbie Ray, Luis Castillo is eminently usable at home still. And I would be very careful with using him on the road, especially in Sacramento. But possibly use him in Houston. I would use him in Anaheim, I think.
Maybe at Texas. I don't think I'm using him at Houston.
I'm using him at Texas and Anaheim at least.
Yeah, I think we're probably more like 65% overall usage on Castillo. I think it's a little too early to take a pitcher like that for me, so I will quietly walk away, and I'm blown away that Brandon Woodruff is in that tier for you, but we will fight about that later. I don't ever really root for you to be wrong about stuff, but I feel like I'm going to make an exception in this instance. Last pitcher for today, Rangers Suarez. I don't think I heard his name when you rattled off that pocket. He hasn't reached 160 regular season innings in the majors before, but he keeps hitters guessing, even though that velocity is just, okay. And he's lived on that shelf for a little while. Had a little bit of a dip last year that was concerning too. I just wonder if this is a profile that will have a hard time at Fenway, but then I think he spent his whole career in Philly. That's a tough place to pitch to, and he's managed to make it work. I never get it right with Ranger Suarez. I think on the hitter side a few years ago, I had the same problem with Whit Merrifield, so I am removing myself from the situation. What should people do with Ranger Suarez at this price?
I have it ranked 57, so I'm sure that's going to go well.
You're going to get lots of love for that.
There was immediately somebody in the first few comments besmirching me for my Suarez ranking, but I have a 4+ ERA projection. He is actually one of the highest. Imai is the highest 4+ ERA projection. So that gives you some context there. The other highest 4+ ERA projections for me are Sandy Alcantara, Robbie Ray, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez. So they go in that order. They're veterans that could maybe be better than that. They give you innings. And so that's why I put them. I do actually hew pretty close to my projections. And, there was a time when Jeff Zimmerman, in his book, The Process, looked at the different publicly available pitcher rankings and found mine to be the best. But I think it's partially because I'm looking at the projections when I'm ranking, I'm using the projections to rank. So in some ways, you could, I don't know, maybe just putting oopsie in the auction calculator beats me, but I'm also trying to use some of my intuition. And my intuition with Suarez is, it's the worst fastball velocity of his career last year. He's never thrown 160 innings in his season. None of his pitches are above average by stuff plus. And he showed the worst ground ball rate of his career. I don't see the markers going in the right direction, and he's kind of overperformed those markers in the past. The only thing that I like is that the new park suppresses righty homers versus his old park. But you know what it does? Increases everything else. Right?
He doesn't really have a bad homer problem anyway.
Yeah.
I think the thing.
What if he gets more doubles because of the Green Monster? And singles?
Yeah, that could work against them, right? Just more traffic as a result of that. I think you got to keep in mind a 3.38 ERA for his career is excellent. A 1.27 WHIP is pretty average, right? So if you are chasing him for one ratio, you just got to realize you need someone else that kind of does the opposite thing to counterweight that accordingly. But the
WHIP thing is a secret killer for ground ball guys. That is the one thing. That is actually one of the reasons why a vintage Sandy Alcantara was kind of interesting, because he was able to do what he did with really good whips when he was at his best. Now that may not be the case, and so anytime you're like, oh, why is this lower ERA guy here in your rankings? A lot of times it's, he's a ground ball guy. He's going to have a higher whip. He's not going to have the same strikeout rate.
In some ways, Ranger Suarez should have been a Lodum guy years ago, and he just, for some reason, doesn't quite click for me. I just can't figure him out. So stick to Eno's analysis as it pertains to Ranger Suarez, because I am always wrong about him. We are going to go. The good news is I think we just got a 4th episode of Starting Pitchers added to our slate. Woo! I don't know if that means we talk too much or what exactly the problem is. So if you're excited about that, drop us a note in the Discord. The conversation continues there. The link for that's in the show description, by the way, if you haven't joined that already. If you made it all the way to the end of this episode, thanks for listening all the way through. Be sure to leave us a nice rating and review, or hit the like button on this video on YouTube. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.